A strange visitor in the storm. The night was dark, the kind of darkness that swallowed everything. Heavy rain poured down from the sky, hammering the roof of an old wooden cabin in the middle of the forest. The wind howled through the trees, shaking the branches like angry hands. Inside the cabin, Carter, an old man with a rough face and tired eyes, sat near the fireplace. His dog, Rusty, lay beside him, his ears twitching at every sound. Carter sipped his warm tea, enjoying the silence. It was a lonely life, but he preferred it that way. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed through the cabin. Carter frowned. Who could be knocking at this hour? There were no neighbors for miles. Travelers never passed through these deep woods. His hands moved to his old shotgun, resting beside the fireplace. He waited. Maybe it was just the wind. But then, another knock. This time, softer, almost desperate. Rusty lifted his head, sniffing the air. His ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. That wasn't a good sign. Carter stood up, moving cautiously toward the door. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer. For a moment, Carter considered ignoring it. But something in that knock, something in Rusty's reaction, made his gut twist. Whoever was outside wasn't normal. Taking a deep breath, Carter unlocked the door and pulled it open, just enough to see. And there she was, a girl, but not a normal one. She stood there in the rain, shivering, her body wrapped in what looked like a torn metallic suit. Her skin was pale blue, almost glowing under the moonlight. Her eyes, large and violet, stared at him with exhaustion and fear. Her wet silver hair clung to her face. She looked weak, scared, cold. Carter felt his instincts kick in. "You lost, girl?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. She tried to speak, but her lips trembled too much. Her legs wobbled, and before she could answer, she collapsed. Carter's reflexes took over. He reached out and caught her just before she hit the ground. Her body was burning hot, like she had a high fever. He hesitated, his mind screaming that something wasn't right. But she was just a girl, a sick girl. Muttering under his breath, he picked her up and carried her inside. Inside the cabin, Carter placed the girl gently on his old couch, covering her with a warm blanket. Rusty sniffed her, then backed away, growling low. Carter shot the dog a look. "Enough, boy. She's freezing." Rusty didn't look convinced. He sat at a distance, watching the girl with sharp eyes. Carter knelt beside her. Up close, she looked even more strange. Her face was delicate, almost too perfect, like something not human. The blue glow on her skin pulsed faintly, like tiny lights moving beneath her flesh. Carter frowned. "Just what the hell are you?" The girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a second, she just stared at him. Then, she suddenly grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Hide," she whispered, her voice weak but urgent. Carter's heart skipped a beat. Hide? From what? The girl's eyes darted to the door, then back to him. Her glowing markings flickered faster, like an alarm. "They will come," she said, barely able to speak. Carter stiffened. He didn't know who they were, but he didn't like the way she said it. He glanced at the door. Outside, the storm raged on, but now, something felt different. The wind had changed direction. Rusty let out a low whimper, his fur standing on edge. Carter grabbed his shotgun. Something was out there, watching. And whatever it was looking for her. Something feels off. The storm outside continued to rage, wind lashing against the wooden walls of the cabin like invisible claws. Rain hammered the roof, filling the silence inside with a rhythmic drumming. But Carter wasn't focused on the storm. He was focused on her. The strange alien girl now lay wrapped in a warm blanket on his old couch. Her breathing had steadied, but her skin still glowed faintly, pulsing like some kind of energy source. Carter had seen a lot of strange things in his lifetime, but this was something else. Rusty sat near the fireplace, his fur bristling, ears twitching every time the girl moved. The dog didn't trust her. Carter couldn't blame him. He took another sip of his now-cold tea, watching her carefully. Then she stirred. Her violet eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim light of the cabin. For a moment, she just stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly as if trying to remember where she was. Then her gaze shifted to Carter. Her body tensed. Carter held up a hand. "Easy now. You passed out on my doorstep. Figured I'd be the decent type and not let you freeze to death." She studied him, her glowing eyes locking onto his. A few seconds passed in silence before she finally spoke. "You, human." Her voice was soft, but there was something else in it. A mix of confusion and relief. Carter gave a slow nod. "That's right. And you? What the hell are you?" The girl hesitated, sitting up slightly. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, revealing the faintly luminescent markings that ran along her collarbone. They shifted like living tattoos, reacting to something unseen. Then she finally answered, "Elira." Carter raised an eyebrow. "That your name, or your species?" She looked away. "Both." Carter exhaled through his nose. "All right, Elira. Want to tell me why you were wandering around in the middle of a damned storm?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she hugged the blanket around herself, shivering slightly, not from the cold, but something else. Finally, she whispered, "I was running." Carter frowned. "From what?" Elira hesitated again, then glanced at the door. Outside, the storm raged on, but Carter knew she wasn't worried about the rain. She turned back to him, her glowing eyes troubled. "They will come. They can smell me now." A dangerous realization. Carter felt a strange unease crawl up his spine. "Who's they?" Elira swallowed. "The hunters." Carter's grip on his shotgun tightened. "And what exactly are these hunters hunting?" Elira looked at him, then at herself. For a moment, Carter didn't understand. Then it hit him. They were hunting her. He muttered a curse under his breath. "What the hell did you bring to my doorstep, girl?" She flinched but held his gaze. "I didn't mean to involve you. I only needed shelter. I thought I could hide." Carter's jaw clenched. "Well, if they can smell you, I'd say hiding ain't gonna work." A loud crash sounded outside. Carter and Elira both froze. Rusty shot up, his fur bristling, a low growl building in his throat. Carter instinctively moved to the window, peering through the thick rain. At first he saw nothing but trees swaying violently in the wind. But then, movement, a shadow, tall and hunched, moving unnaturally fast between the trees. His gut tightened. "Elira," he said slowly, keeping his eyes on the movement outside. "Tell me what I'm dealing with. Right now." Elira swallowed hard. "They are Acris hunters. They hunt my kind during our mating season." Carter turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Mating season." She averted her gaze, her cheeks darkening slightly. I didn't think it would trigger here. So far from my world." Carter ran a hand over his face. This was getting worse by the second. "So what? These things hunt you for sport?" Elira shook her head. "Not for sport. For claiming." Carter stared at her. "Claiming." She nodded, gripping the blanket tighter. "They take females who release pheromones, and they don't let them go. Ever." Carter's stomach sank. This wasn't just a hunt. This was an abduction, a breeding ritual. And they were here. The hunters close in. Another sound, this time a deep, inhuman growl. Rusty barked wildly, backing away from the door. Something was getting closer. Carter grabbed his shotgun and cocked it. Elira shook her head. "Guns won't stop them." Carter scowled. "Lady, I've spent 40 years hunting things that don't want to die. Everything dies if you shoot it enough." Elira still looked uncertain, but there was no time to argue. Outside, The creatures moved closer, their massive forms shifting through the storm. Carter caught a glimpse of thick, scaled skin, long razor-like claws, and piercing red eyes. They were hunting. Carter took a breath, steadying himself. "All right. You got any bright ideas?" Aelira hesitated. Then she lifted her trembling hands. Her bioluminescent markings flickered, and for a moment, Carter saw a small spark of energy pulse through her fingertips. "I can try to hide my scent, but it won't last long." Carter nodded. "Then we make a plan. Fast." Outside, the shadows drew closer. The cabin was no longer safe. This was only the beginning. The hunters arrived. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood, burning fire, and something else, something Carter couldn't place. Aelira sat near the fireplace, her breathing slow but uneven. Her glowing markings flickered, shifting colors in a way that made Carter uneasy. Every now and then, she winced, her fingers pressing against her temples. She was struggling, not just physically but with something deeper, something Carter didn't understand. Rusty let out a low, warning growl from his spot near the door. His ears were pinned back, his body tense. Outside, the storm raged on, but Carter knew the real danger wasn't the weather. He adjusted his grip on his shotgun and took a deep breath. "All right," he said, his voice steady but low. "Tell me everything. No more half-truths. No more vague warnings. What the hell are we up against?" Aelira exhaled sharply, as if bracing herself. Then she looked up at him. "The Acris hunters," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Carter gestured impatiently. "Yeah, I got that part. But what the hell are they?" Aelira hesitated. Then she swallowed and began. "They are a predator species. Large, fast, stronger than you can imagine. Their senses are built for tracking. Once they find a female of my kind, they don't stop. They won't stop. Not until they claim what they came for." Carter's grip on his shotgun tightened. "Claim? You mean?" Aelira's jaw clenched. "They don't kill. Not at first. They—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "If they take me, I will never be free again." Carter inhaled deeply, taking a step back. His mind processed the information, and he didn't like what it was telling him. He had fought men. He had fought wild animals. Hell, he had even fought his own demons. But this was something worse. He glanced at the window, scanning the tree line. And then he saw them. Shadows in the trees. 3 figures stood just beyond the tree line, their massive, hunched forms barely visible in the storm's darkness. Carter narrowed his eyes. They were big, too big. Their red, glowing eyes stared at the cabin with an eerie stillness, unblinking, unmoving. They weren't charging. They weren't making noise. They were watching, waiting. Carter's instincts screamed at him. They were testing him. The low, rumbling growl that followed sent a shiver through the air. The kind of sound that didn't come from anything human. Carter felt his gut twist. They know she's inside. Aelira suddenly tensed, her whole body going rigid. "They can feel me," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. "They know I'm here." Carter clicked his tongue, already moving. "All right. If we're gonna fight, we're gonna fight smart." He moved quickly, checking the windows, the doors, making sure everything was locked and secured. Aelira shook her head. "It won't work." Carter shot her a look. "Lady, you got a better idea." She hesitated. Then, to his shock, she stood up. Her knees wobbled slightly, but her expression had hardened. "There is one way," she admitted. "But you won't like it." Carter folded his arms. "Try me." Aelira inhaled. "I can mask my scent, make it harder for them to track me. But it requires physical contact. I need an anchor, someone to stabilize my energy." Carter raised an eyebrow. "Define physical contact." Aelira's cheeks darkened slightly, But she didn't break eye contact. A bond. Carter just stared at her. Then, without hesitation, he said, "Nope." Lyra blinked. "Absolutely not," Carter continued, shaking his head. "No offense, lady, but I'm not exactly looking to get involved in some alien love spell." Lyra actually looked amused. "It's not a love spell. It's survival." Carter sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "How exactly does this bond work?" Lyra hesitated. "I link my energy to yours. It won't be permanent. Just enough to confuse them. To make them think I've already been claimed." Carter let out a humorless laugh. "So basically, you want me to pretend I already own the prize so the monsters walk away?" Lyra frowned. "That is a crude way to put it, but yes." Carter exhaled. He glanced at Rusty, who was still growling at the door. The dog had never acted this way before, and that's when Carter noticed something. The creatures outside weren't moving. They had stopped at the edge of the tree line, waiting. Then suddenly, the front door rattled. Carter spun, shotgun raised. Rusty barked wildly. Lyra's hands glowed faintly, her markings pulsing in response. Then, bang! Something slammed against the door with inhuman force. Carter's pulse spiked. Son of a... Crack! The door split slightly, the wood groaning under the pressure. "They're testing it," Lyra whispered. Carter's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. If those things broke through, it would be over. "Lyra," he said, glancing at her, "how long does that bond trick last?" She hesitated. "An hour, maybe 2. Carter exhaled. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "All right," he muttered, lowering his shotgun. "Do it." Lyra's eyes widened slightly, as if she wasn't expecting him to agree so fast, but she quickly stepped closer. She reached out, placing her glowing hands against his chest. Carter felt it immediately. A warm, almost electric pulse ran through his body, like a current traveling through his veins. His breath caught, his muscles tensed. For a brief moment, his vision blurred. And then he saw something. A flash of Lyra's memories. Her world. Her people. The endless running. The fear. The loneliness. And then, a cold, dark presence. The Acris hunters. Carter gasped, stumbling back. Lyra caught him. "It's done," she whispered. "They will sense the bond now. We just have to hope it's enough." Carter barely had time to recover before the door exploded inward. A massive shape lurched into the cabin, filling the room with the stench of blood and rot. And for the first time, Carter saw what they were truly up against: a battle for survival. The cabin door exploded inward, splintering into jagged shards as a monstrous form lurched inside. Carter didn't have time to think, only to act. The thing that entered was massive, hunched, and covered in dark, chitinous plating, its muscles rippling under thick, leathery skin. Red eyes gleamed in the dim firelight, locking onto him with a terrifying intelligence. Its claws, longer than knives, curled with anticipation. It was hunting. And Carter was in its way. A split-second decision. Rusty lunged forward, barking furiously. "Rusty, no," Carter roared. But the beast was faster. With a blur of motion, it swiped its massive claw. Rusty barely dodged, but the force sent him tumbling across the wooden floor, yelping in pain. Carter's rage ignited. His shotgun was already raised. Boom! The blast hit the creature square in the chest. For a split second, Carter thought he had won. Then the thing barely flinched. Carter's stomach dropped. The Acris hunter looked down at the smoking wound on its chest, a wound that barely bled. Then it lifted its head and snarled. It was mocking him. Carter cursed under his breath. "Well, that ain't good." Lyra moved. She raised her hands, and her bioluminescent markings glowed violently. Energy surged from her palms, striking the Acris like a bolt of lightning. The creature howled, its body seizing from the sudden shock. Its claws dug into the floor, its back arching in pain. Alyra trembled, gasping. It won't hold for long. The monster lunged. Carter grabbed Alyra and pulled her out of the way just in time. The beast's claws tore through the air where she had just been standing, shredding part of the wall instead. Splinters flew. Carter pushed Alyra behind him. "Stay back," he growled. Alyra didn't argue. She was breathing heavily, her body shaking from the effort of using her powers. Carter knew he had one shot at this. He grabbed the nearest thing he could, a fire poker from the fireplace. The fight turns desperate. The Acris hunter snarled and charged again. Carter dodged at the last second, swinging the fire poker like a club. Crack! The metal bars smashed against the creature's skull. The beast stumbled, disoriented for a brief moment. Carter saw his chance, and he took it. With every ounce of strength he had, he plunged the red-hot poker into the creature's side. The monster roared, its cry shaking the entire cabin. The fire poker burned into its flesh, sending up a sickening sizzle and the smell of burning kitten. For the first time, it felt pain. Carter gritted his teeth. "Not so tough now, are you?" But his victory was short-lived. The Acris lashed out blindly, knocking Carter clean across the room. He crashed against the wooden table, knocking over plates and supplies. A sharp pain shot through his ribs. He could feel something was bruised, maybe broken. "Damn it," he muttered, coughing. The Acris stood tall again, panting. It was injured, but not out. Carter tried to stand, but it was too late. The beast lunged for Alyra. Alyra's power awakens. Alyra raised her hands in defense, but she was too weak to summon another energy blast. The Acris was almost upon her. And then, her markings flared brighter than ever. Alyra screamed, not in fear, but in something else. A pulse of raw energy burst outward. The cabin shook. The Acris was thrown back, slamming into the wall hard enough to crack the wooden planks. Carter shielded his eyes, blinking as the light faded. When he looked again, Alyra was different. Her eyes weren't just glowing. They were burning. Her entire body shimmered, her bioluminescent markings shifting like liquid fire. And Carter realized, this was no ordinary girl. The tides turned. The Acris snarled, shaking itself off. Alyra took a step forward. The air around her hummed with power. The creature hesitated. For the first time, it looked afraid. Alyra's voice came out stronger, deeper. "You will leave. Now." The Acris growled, but it was uncertain now. Carter saw his chance. He grabbed his last Molotov cocktail from under the table. With a flick of his lighter, the flame ignited. "Hey, ugly," Carter called. "Catch." And he threw it. The bottle shattered against the creature's head, and fire erupted. The Acris screamed, its chitinous skin catching fire as the flames spread. Carter grabbed Alyra's wrist. "We're leaving. Now." She didn't argue. Together, they ran out the back door, Rusty close behind. Behind them, the burning Acris thrashed, its screams fading into the storm as they disappeared into the dark woods. But Carter knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Escape through the wilderness. The night outside was as wild as the chaos they had just escaped. The storm had grown worse. Thick sheets of rain poured from the sky, the wind howling like a wounded beast. The dense forest loomed ahead, its towering trees casting deep shadows under the flickering lightning. Carter ran fast, gripping Alyra's wrist with one hand and holding his shotgun in the other. Rusty dashed ahead, ears pinned back, his instincts guiding him through the terrain. Behind them, the cabin burned, its wooden walls collapsing inwards as the fire consumed everything. The Acris hunter inside let out one last, horrifying shriek before it was silenced forever. But Carter wasn't celebrating, because that wasn't the only hunter, and he could hear the others coming. The chase begins. Illyra stumbled beside him, her breathing uneven, labored. The intense energy surge she had released earlier had clearly drained her. Carter threw a quick glance at her. "You holding up?" She nodded weakly, but her legs trembled. "I just need to keep moving." Carter's jaw tightened. She was struggling. But stopping wasn't an option. Then, the sound came. A distant, inhuman howl echoed through the forest. Then another. Carter didn't slow down, but his mind raced. They weren't just being hunted. They were being herded. These creatures weren't dumb. They were driving them somewhere. And Carter had a bad feeling about where that was. "Damn it," he muttered. They pushed forward, twigs snapping under their boots, the cold rain making the ground slippery and treacherous. Every step felt like a battle. Then, Rusty barked sharply. Carter looked up, and his stomach dropped. A massive rocky cliff loomed in front of them. A dead end. Trapped like prey. Carter spun around. The trees behind them shifted, their shadows moving unnaturally. The Acris were close. Too close. Illyra gripped his arm, her body shaking. "They're coming," she whispered. Carter knew it too. His mind raced, analyzing the terrain. The cliff face was too steep to climb, at least not with Illyra in her weakened state. They were trapped. But trapped didn't mean beaten. Carter's fingers flexed on his shotgun. He had 2 shells left, one for each of them if it came to that. Then the bushes rustled, and the Acris stepped into the clearing, face to face with death. 2 of them. One was even bigger than the one they had just fought, standing almost 8 feet tall, its muscular frame covered in black chitinous plating that glistened in the rain. Its razor-sharp claws twitched, ready to strike. The second was leaner, faster, moving on all 4s like a predator stalking its prey. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Illyra. Illyra went still. Carter felt it. The air grew heavy, thick with something unnatural. Then, he saw the Acris lean forward, sniffing the air. And just like that, they hesitated. It was working. The fake bond Illyra had created was confusing them. They could sense something different about her scent, as if she had already been claimed. But Carter saw the way they looked at him, like they were testing the illusion, like they were deciding if he was strong enough to be a real threat. Carter clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about dominance. And if he didn't act now, they would see through the trick. Bluffing death itself, Carter did the only thing he could. He took a deliberate step forward. His movements were slow, controlled, like a predator sizing up another predator. The larger Acris let out a low guttural growl, baring its jagged teeth. Carter stared it down. No fear, no hesitation, just pure defiance. Then, he cocked his shotgun. The sound echoed loud and sharp, cutting through the storm like a warning bell. Illyra's glowing hand gripped his arm, but she didn't stop him. She understood. This was a game of power, and Carter was betting everything. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "You want to take her?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You're gonna have to go through me first." Silence. The rain dripped from the trees, the wind howled. The larger Acris took another step forward, then stopped. It was studying him. Carter could see the conflict in those glowing red eyes. The Acris weren't used to humans fighting back like this. They were used to weak prey. But Carter wasn't weak. He was something they had never faced before. Then, the larger Acris let out a deep guttural snarl. And then, they stepped back. Not in fear, but in acceptance. The leaner one sniffed the air one last time, then let out a long, strange growl, almost like speech. Then, just like that, they turned and disappeared into the trees. Carter exhaled slowly. His heart pounded in his chest. Illyra stared at him, stunned. You made them leave." Carter lowered his shotgun. "They weren't sure," he muttered. So I made the decision for them. Alira shook her head, a small, almost incredulous smile playing on her lips. No human has ever done that before. Carter snorted. Guess I'm not most humans. Alira was silent for a long moment. Then she took his hand, squeezing it lightly. No, she agreed softly. You're not. The long walk to safety. The rain began to ease, the storm slowly breaking apart. The worst was over. For now. Carter ran a hand down his face, exhausted. He glanced at Alira, who was still watching him like he was something impossible. Rusty barked once, wagging his tail. The danger was gone. Carter sighed. Let's get moving before they change their minds. Alira nodded, a new determination in her glowing eyes. The forest stretched ahead. Unknown. Dangerous. But Carter didn't care. He had faced death itself tonight. And won. The truth about Alira. The storm had finally passed, leaving the forest eerily silent. The only sounds were the soft rustling of trees, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, and the rhythmic footsteps of Carter and Alira as they pushed forward through the damp undergrowth. Carter's shotgun was slung over his shoulder now, his body aching from the earlier fight. His ribs hurt like hell, and he could feel bruises forming beneath his jacket, but he didn't complain. They were alive. For now. Rusty padded ahead, sniffing at the wet ground, leading them forward through the winding path of the deep woods. But Carter knew they couldn't just keep walking forever. Sooner or later, Alira needed rest, and he needed answers, because something wasn't adding up. Those Acris hunters had backed off, but not out of fear. There was something else, something Carter hadn't figured out yet, and that bothered him. Finally, he slowed his steps. All right, he muttered, glancing at Alira. We need to stop for a second. She didn't argue. She was tired, her body barely keeping up. Her glowing markings had dimmed, but Carter could still see their faint shimmer beneath the moonlight. She was hiding something, and he was done playing along. The unspoken truth. Carter found a small clearing, dry enough for them to sit. He lowered himself onto a fallen log with a grunt, rolling his sore shoulder. But Alira sat on a smooth rock across from him, pulling her knees to her chest. For a few minutes, they just sat in silence. The world around them felt calm now, like the storm had washed away the immediate danger. But Carter knew better. They weren't safe. Not until he understood what the hell was really going on. So he finally said, resting his arms on his knees, "You gonna tell me the whole truth now?" Alira's violet eyes met his, hesitant but unreadable. "I already told you." "No," Carter cut her off, shaking his head. "You told me pieces, enough to keep me from running the other way. But I ain't stupid." He gestured around them. "Those things back there, they weren't just hunting you." Alira stiffened. Carter leaned forward, his tone calm, but firm. "They weren't afraid of you. They weren't even afraid of me." He let that hang in the air before adding, "They were testing you." Alira flinched. Carter caught that. Bingo. "See, that's what's bugging me." He folded his arms. "They left because they figured I was a threat. But that don't make sense. They could have just torn me apart." Alira swallowed, looking away. Carter's jaw tightened. "So tell me, Alira, what the hell are they really after?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, she exhaled, defeated. And finally, she told him the truth. Alira's secret. "I wasn't just running from the Acris." Alira's voice was soft, but heavy with something deeper. Carter waited. Alira curled her fingers into her sleeves. "They weren't just hunting me because of mating season." Carter narrowed his eyes. "Then why?" Alira hesitated before she admitted. "Because I am the last of my kind." The words hung in the air. Carter blinked. He had expected something bad, but not this. "The last," he repeated. Alira nodded. "My people are gone. Wiped out. The Acris destroyed my world. They harvested my kind. They took the females, slaughtered the males, and left nothing behind. Carter's gut twisted. He had seen war. He had seen the aftermath of massacres. But this was genocide. Lyra's fingers dug into her arms, her eyes distant. I was taken when I was young, put into a breeding program, one of many. But I escaped. And ever since then, I've been running. Carter's chest felt tight. She had been alone all this time. Alone and hunted. He took a slow breath. So that's why they want you back. Lyra nodded. They don't want me dead. They want to own me. To use me to rebuild my species. Under their control. Carter felt sick. This wasn't just about survival. This was about enslavement. He ran a hand down his face. Jesus. Lyra let out a bitter laugh. There is no Jesus where I come from. Carter gestured impatiently. Yeah, I got that part. But what the hell are they? Lyra hesitated. Then she swallowed and began. They are a predator species. Large, fast, stronger than you can imagine. Their senses are built for tracking. Once they find a female of my kind, they don't stop. They won't stop. Not until they claim what they came for. Carter's grip on his shotgun tightened. Claim? You mean? Lyra's jaw clenched. They don't kill. Not at first. She stopped herself, shaking her head. If they take me, I will never be free again. Carter inhaled deeply, taking a step back. His mind processed the information, and he didn't like what it was telling him. He had fought men. He had fought wild animals. Hell, he had even fought his own demons. But this was something worse. He glanced at the window, scanning the tree line. And then he saw them. Shadows in the trees. 3 figures stood just beyond the tree line, their massive, hunched forms barely visible in the storm's darkness. Carter narrowed his eyes. They were big, too big. Their red, glowing eyes stared at the cabin with an eerie stillness, unblinking, unmoving. They weren't charging. They weren't making noise. They were watching, waiting. Carter's instincts screamed at him. They were testing him. The low, rumbling growl that followed sent a shiver through the air. The kind of sound that didn't come from anything human. Carter felt his gut twist. They know she's inside. Lyra suddenly tensed, her whole body going rigid. They can feel me, she whispered, eyes wide with fear. They know I'm here. Carter clicked his tongue, already moving. All right, if we're gonna fight, we're gonna fight smart. He moved quickly, checking the windows, the doors, making sure everything was locked and secured. Lyra shook her head. It won't work. Carter shot her a look. Lady, you got a better idea. She hesitated. Then, to his shock, she stood up. Her knees wobbled slightly, but her expression had hardened. There is one way, she admitted. But you won't like it. Carter folded his arms. Try me. Lyra inhaled. I can mask my scent, make it harder for them to track me. But it requires physical contact. I need an anchor, someone to stabilize my energy. Carter raised an eyebrow. Define physical contact. Lyra's cheeks darkened slightly, but she didn't break eye contact. A bond. Carter just stared at her. Then, without hesitation, he said, Nope. Lyra blinked. Absolutely not, Carter continued, shaking his head. No offense, lady, but I'm not exactly looking to get involved in some alien love spell. Lyra actually looked amused. It's not a love spell. It's survival. Carter sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. How exactly does this bond work? Lyra hesitated. I link my energy to yours. It won't be permanent. Just enough to confuse them. To make them think I'd already been claimed. Carter let out a humorless laugh. So basically, you want me to pretend I already own the prize so the monsters walk away. Lyra frowned. That is, A crude way to put it, but yes. Carter exhaled. He glanced at Rusty, who was still growling at the door. The dog had never acted this way before, and that's when Carter noticed something. The creatures outside weren't moving. They had stopped at the edge of the tree line, waiting. Then suddenly, the front door rattled. Carter spun, shotgun raised. Rusty barked wildly. Ailira's hands glowed faintly, her markings pulsing in response. Then, bang! Something slammed against the door with inhuman force. Carter's pulse spiked. Son of a... Crack! The door split slightly, the wood groaning under the pressure. They're testing it, Ailira whispered. Carter's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. If those things broke through, it would be over. Ailira, he said, glancing at her. How long does that bond trick last? She hesitated. An hour, maybe 2. Carter exhaled. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. All right, he muttered, lowering his shotgun. Do it. Ailira's eyes widened slightly, as if she wasn't expecting him to agree so fast, but she quickly stepped closer. She reached out, placing her glowing hands against his chest. Carter felt it immediately. A warm, almost electric pulse ran through his body, like a current traveling through his veins. His breath caught, his muscles tensed. For a brief moment, his vision blurred. And then he saw something. A flash of Ailira's memories. Her world. Her people. The endless running. The fear. The loneliness. And then, a cold, dark presence. The Egris hunters. Carter gasped, stumbling back. Ailira caught him. It's done, she whispered. They will sense the bond now. We just have to hope it's enough. Carter barely had time to recover before. The door exploded inward. A massive shape lurched into the cabin, filling the room with the stench of blood and rot. Ailira hesitated before she admitted, "Because I am the last of my kind." The words hung in the air. Carter blinked. He had expected something bad, but not this. "The last," he repeated. Ailira nodded. "My people are gone. Wiped out. The Egris destroyed my world. They harvested my kind. They took the females, slaughtered the males, and left nothing behind." Carter's gut twisted. He had seen war. He had seen the aftermath of massacres. But this was genocide. Ailira's fingers dug into her arms, her eyes distant. "I was taken when I was young, put into a breeding program, one of many. But I escaped, and ever since then, I've been running." Carter's chest felt tight. She had been alone all this time. Alone and hunted. He took a slow breath. "So that's why they want you back." Ailira nodded. "They don't want me dead. They want to own me, to use me to rebuild my species. Under their control." Carter felt sick. This wasn't just about survival. This was about enslavement. He ran a hand down his face. "Jesus." Ailira let out a bitter laugh. "There is no Jesus where I come from." Carter almost smiled at that. Almost. Then, a new thought struck him. "So what the hell happens to me?" He gestured between them. "After that whole bonding trick, if they thought I claimed you, what does that mean?" Ailira was quiet for a moment. Then she said the words that changed everything. "It means you're now part of this, whether you like it or not. A new target." Carter didn't speak. He didn't have to, because deep down he already knew. The Egris hadn't just tested him, they had marked him. They weren't just after Ailira anymore. Now, they were after both of them. Carter closed his eyes briefly. "Well, ain't that just great?" Rusty let out a soft whimper, sensing the shift in the air. Carter sighed. "All right. Suppose I don't like this whole being hunted thing. What's our move?" Ailira studied him. "We need to get off this planet." Carter scoffed. "Yeah. Let me just call up my local spaceship dealer." Ailira shook her head. "There's a way. I had a ship. It crashed, but some of its systems still work. If we can get to it, I can send a distress signal. Carter frowned. And let whom know? More aliens. Lyra hesitated. A friend. If she's still out there. Carter rolled his shoulder, thinking fast. They had no other choice. The Acris would come back. And next time, they wouldn't leave without a fight. He exhaled sharply. All right, Princess. Let's go find your damned ship. Lyra blinked. Princess. Carter gave her a tired smirk. You're the last of your kind, right? That makes you royalty. Lyra actually laughed. It was small, tired, but real. And for the first time that night, Carter thought, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The journey continues. As they started walking again, the forest seemed different. Darker. More dangerous. But Carter wasn't afraid anymore. Because now he had something to fight for. And if the Acris wanted Lyra back, they were gonna have to go through him first. To be continued. You said. Continue with Part 7 with more unique and lengthy. ChatGPT said. Part 7. A decision that changes everything. The forest stretched endlessly before them, shrouded in mist and the aftermath of the storm. The scent of damp earth lingered in the air as Carter led the way, his grip firm on his shotgun. Rusty walked close by, ears twitching, alert for any sign of danger. Behind him, Lyra moved carefully, her breathing still slightly uneven. The last few hours had taken a toll on her, and despite her alien endurance, she was exhausted. But there was no time to stop, because Carter knew they weren't safe yet. The hidden path. The sky had begun to lighten, a pale gray signaling the first hints of dawn. Carter had spent his life out in the wilderness, tracking, surviving, knowing the land like the back of his hand. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if his experience meant anything. Because this wasn't his game anymore. This was bigger than him. Lyra suddenly stopped, placing a hand against a moss-covered tree, her glowing eyes scanning the area. We're close, she whispered. Carter frowned. Close to what? She pointed toward a ridge further ahead. My ship. What's left of it? Carter followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. But then, he noticed the unnatural shape of metal, partially buried under thick vegetation. The wreckage had blended into the environment, overgrown with vines, and softened by time. But it was there. Carter's gut tightened. If the ship was still intact enough to send a signal, this was their ticket out. But he also knew this was too easy. Lyra felt it too. They wouldn't just let me go, she muttered. Carter exhaled. No, they wouldn't. And right on cue, Rusty let out a sharp bark. Carter's instincts screamed. He turned, shotgun raised, and the Acris attacked. The final confrontation. They came from the trees, fast and silent. 2 of them. No, 3, blending into the shadows. Carter barely had time to react before one lunged. He fired. Boom. The shot ripped through the first Acris, sending it staggering back with a snarl. But Carter didn't stop. He pumped the shotgun again, aiming for the next one. Lyra shouted something in her native tongue, her voice commanding. For a brief second, the Acris hesitated. But it wasn't enough. The third one struck. Carter barely dodged in time, the creature's razor-sharp claws slicing through his jacket. He stumbled, landing hard on his side. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Rusty lunged. The dog bit down on the Acris's arm, snarling viciously. The creature let out a frustrated roar, trying to shake the dog off. Carter seized the moment. He grabbed the hunting knife from his belt hand, plunged it straight into the Acris's throat. The creature gurgled, its claws spasming before it collapsed, dead. Carter rolled off the body, gasping. His ribs were screaming. His entire body was on fire with exhaustion. But he wasn't done. Lyra stood a few feet away, her hands raised, energy crackling around her fingers. The remaining Acres circled her, wary now. They knew. She wasn't weak anymore. She was awakening. Elira looked at Carter, and he understood. This was it. Either they ended this now, or the Acres would never stop. The power within. Elira closed her eyes. Her bioluminescent markings burned brightly, shifting from soft blue to a deep, fiery gold. The Acres snarled, sensing the change. Carter pushed himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. But he wasn't backing down. Not now. The air around them shifted, electric. Then, Elira's eyes snapped open, and the world exploded. A wave of raw energy surged outward, rippling through the trees, bending reality itself. The Acres howled in agony, their bodies convulsing as the force of the blast ripped through them. Carter felt the shockwave hit him, but Elira shielded him. He barely saw the Acres disintegrate into dust, their monstrous forms unable to withstand the raw power unleashed upon them. Then, silence. The trees settled. The wind died down. The energy faded. It was over. Carter exhaled slowly, lowering his shotgun. Elira collapsed to her knees. He was beside her in an instant. "Hey, stay with me." She blinked up at him, a tired but relieved smile on her lips. "They're gone." Carter helped her sit up. "Damn right they are." Rusty limped over, licking Elira's hand before nudging Carter. "Good boy," Carter muttered, scratching the dog's head. For the first time in what felt like forever, Carter allowed himself to breathe. They had won. The choice that changes everything. The wrecked alien ship stood before them, silent and waiting. Elira had said she could send a distress signal. Her people were gone, but she had one last chance to find allies. And Carter could walk away. He could return to his quiet life in the woods, pretend none of this had ever happened. But as he looked at Elira, the last of her kind, alone in the universe, he realized something. He couldn't leave her. Not after everything. She met his gaze, studying him carefully. "You don't have to come," she said softly. "You've done enough." Carter scoffed. "Lady, I don't leave people behind." Elira's lips curled into a small, grateful smile. And just like that, his decision was made. He didn't belong to Earth anymore. Not after this. Not after becoming part of something bigger. Carter adjusted his shotgun, exhaling sharply. "All right, princess. Let's get the hell off this rock." Elira laughed, a real, genuine laugh. And as the sun finally rose over the wreckage, Carter knew. This was just the beginning. A decision that changes everything. The first light of dawn broke through the trees, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean but still trembling from the battle. Carter's breath was heavy, his body aching from bruises and exhaustion. Every part of him screamed to sit down, to rest, to let the adrenaline fade. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not when so much was still at stake. The wreckage of Elira's ship stood before them, partially buried under vines and debris, a relic of her past, now their only hope for survival. And around them, the bodies of the fallen Acres hunters lay smoldering, disintegrating into ash and darkened embers where Elira's unleashed power had struck them down. Carter took in a slow breath. They had won. But the real battle, it was just beginning. A moment of stillness. Elira sat on the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her glowing markings flickered weakly, her strength drained from the power she had just unleashed. Carter knelt beside her. "You all right?" She nodded, but he could tell she was lying. Still, he didn't push. Elira had been fighting alone for so long. She wasn't used to someone looking out for her. So Carter simply offered his hand. Elira hesitated, her violet eyes searching his face. Then she reached out and took it. Her fingers were warm, even after everything. Carter helped her to her feet. Rusty, ever the loyal companion, wagged his tail, circling them once before sitting by Carter's side. For a moment, none of them spoke. Just breathing. Just existing. Alive. But the moment didn't last. Because the sky, clear now from the storm, held new dangers. The signal that changed everything. Alyra turned toward the wrecked ship, eyes narrowing. "It should still work," she murmured. Carter arched a brow. "This thing." He gestured at the half-buried hunk of alien metal, rusted and scarred from a crash that should have been fatal. "Looks pretty damn dead to me." Alyra ignored him, stepping forward and pressing her hand against the outer shell. The ship reacted instantly. A pulse of energy rippled through the hull, and suddenly, the metal groaned and shifted, panels lighting up with a dim, ghostly glow. Carter took a step back. "Well, hell." Alyra's hands moved quickly, her fingers tracing symbols along the ship's surface. The lights inside flickered to life, and a holographic interface materialized before her. Carter watched as she worked, her expressions shifting between focus and hope. Then her breath hitched. Carter's instincts sharpened instantly. "What?" Alyra didn't look at him. "Someone received my distress call." Carter's grip tightened on his shotgun. That a good thing or a bad thing? Alyra hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. An unwelcome response. The ship's screen flashed, displaying strange alien symbols that Carter couldn't read. But Alyra could. And whatever she saw, it wasn't what she wanted. Her hand shook slightly, her glowing markings pulsing in a nervous rhythm. "Talk to me," Carter said, stepping closer. "Who's out there?" Alyra swallowed hard before finally whispering, "Not a friend." Carter's blood ran cold. "Tell me we didn't just call more of those hunters." Alyra shook her head. "Worse." She turned to him, her expression dark. "The ones who owned me." Carter stiffened. He didn't speak, didn't move. Because he knew, he didn't have to ask what that meant. He had seen the scars on Alyra's body, the way she flinched at certain sounds, the haunted look in her eyes when she spoke of her past. Whoever was coming, they were worse than the Acris. And they were coming for her. For both of them. The weight of a choice. Carter turned his gaze toward the horizon, scanning the sky. Nothing yet. But it wouldn't be long. His gut twisted. He had never signed up for this. He was just a tired old man, living out his days in a cabin far away from the rest of the world. But now he was standing between a girl who had lost everything and the monsters that wanted to take her back. And the worst part, there was only one way out. Alyra must have sensed his thoughts because she stepped forward, her hand lightly touching his arm. "I won't blame you if you leave," she whispered. "You've already saved me once. You don't have to do it again." Carter let out a dry, bitter chuckle. "Yeah." He looked down at her. "And where exactly am I gonna go? Back to my quiet life. Pretend none of this happened." Alyra didn't answer. Because they both knew that wasn't an option anymore. Carter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he muttered, "guess I've done dumber things in my life." Alyra's lips curved into a small, sad smile. "You're staying." Carter exhaled, staring at the rising sun, knowing damn well it might be the last one he ever saw on this planet. Then he looked back at Alyra and gave her a crooked smirk. "Hell," he muttered, "might as well see how this plays out." Alyra laughed softly, a sound that held relief, fear, and something else. Something hopeful. And as Carter reached for his shotgun, standing beside the last survivor of an extinct race, he knew one thing for certain. They weren't running anymore. Final scene. The sky burns. Far above, beyond the clouds, something lurked in the void of space. A massive ship, black and menacing, began its descent. It wasn't coming to negotiate. It was coming to collect its lost property. And this time, Carter was ready to show them she wasn't theirs anymore.